Hi, I'm Stephen Porter or SJ Porter. I work at KNIME. I'm a senior site reliability engineer. And what I'm going to be talking about is how we use compatibility matrix and some of the things we got out of it and a little bit of the specifics. So, shameless plug, I thought I'd do a quick introduction to who KNIME is as a company. We're a low-code open source platform for data analytics, data science, machine learning. So some might call it low code, others call it visual programming. I would say we kind of lean a little closer towards visual programming, where it's a little lower level. Some low code tools are a little more abstracted than others. Our desktop client is free. I was, before I worked at KNIME, I was a user and a customer and a fan of the software. I do encourage trying it out. It's really cool. So obviously, even though it's free, we do have some premium products, and that's really in the team collaboration space. And that's what I work on. So I work on, as you can see, I work on KNIME Business Hub, which is kind of our more enterprise solution in which we're installing our application in Kubernetes in customer environments. So we have some users just use our free desktop software and they never buy anything. But in an organization, as users start to want to collaborate and host workflows and so on, that's when it gets into the KNIME Business Hub space. So yeah, again, this talk is about replicated compatibility matrix. I did want to cover just very briefly for anybody who doesn't use it or hasn't heard of that feature. Replicated compatibility matrix to me is test clusters. So it's their feature set for provisioning short-lived clusters. So I think the current limit is like 48-hour maximum time to live for the cluster itself. There's a ton of distributions that they support, a bunch of Kubernetes versions and feature sets. So it's a really cool feature. And yeah, a couple things worth mentioning. So you provision the clusters via the CLI, typically the replicated CLI. So very simple commands to create something and connect to it. And so there's a lot of potential for automation. And I think that was their replicated's original intention, that you would do an automated solution for using this kind of feature. But as you'll see, we use it for a number of different purposes. And I guess before I move on, I'll say one thing. I just don't want to forget to bring it up in the talk. One thing that we very heavily do with CMX is we use our support bundle to assess whether or not our application installed successfully. So maybe this is obvious to some and not as obvious to others, but the support bundle has a file in it. I think it's analysis.json that will record errors if any show up, and that's what we use essentially. So we'll spin up clusters, install our application, generate a support bundle, and then we can use that support bundle to make decisions about the cluster. So for some general use cases that we have, and I did check, I think we have over 2,500 of these test clusters we've created so far. We use it for a few things. We use it for ad hoc testing. So, so somebody internal, a developer, whatever, just needs a cluster for a few hours. We use it for that. We use it for pre-release testing, as you'll see a little bit later. We use these clusters to validate pull requests. So when people are adding features to our application, we'll spin up a cluster and test the full installation to see if that works. And we use that in like Bitbucket for ourselves. We do load testing a little bit. I don't know if Replicated's happy that we're doing load testing on the CMX clusters, but we are doing a little bit of load testing where we'll put some traffic onto our application and see how it behaves. And yeah, some other obvious things. We do use it. I use it all the time for feature development personally, just when I need a quick cluster to see if some change to a Helm chart is working or that kind of thing. So some big things that we've gotten out of using it. Time and money saved. So I would say we've easily caught dozens of bugs by now using these test clusters. I don't have an exact count, unfortunately, but I would say I've personally seen dozens get caught. And a ridiculous amount of time saved if you think about how a lot of our internal users were provisioning these test clusters before. So we have a lot of internal users that they would only need a cluster for a day, but they would be spinning up an EC2 machine manually, running commands manually. It might take an hour to fully provision the cluster and any networking things, elastic IP addresses and VPCs and so on. So a lot of complexity is saved. And that kind of gets into the next point, which is that I think my favorite thing about this feature is that it gives us the right level of abstraction. For our team, we have to support all kinds of distributions and Kubernetes versions and so on. And it's really nice to have a product where we're not worried about the specifics of provisioning those environments. It's just we're focusing on the business value that we're delivering, which is just does our application work in those environments? And so not having to play around with Terraform or whatever to provision these clusters ourselves is great. We just interact with the CLI. Yeah, we can test our version or our application on all kinds of versions. I would say we really needed something like this. We were discussing how we would do it internally, and we knew we probably wanted to use Jenkins, but we weren't sure how we were going to provision the clusters, and we were looking into Terraform, and I think the end result would have been drastically more complicated if we would have tried to roll our own solution for this. And my last thought is just that we do have quite a number of departments using this, so I'm not sure what Replicated originally had in mind, but I would say most of our internal users that are dealing with any kind of technical problems have probably spun up at least one of these clusters by now. Something interesting to show off. I can't remember exactly if we get this data out of the CLI or if we use the REST API for it, but our data team does collect CMX usage data, and then we can report on that internally. So I'm actually using KNIME to generate these visualizations, but you can see the things I'm looking at really is which distributions are in use. So you can see curl and EKS are by far and away our most popular distributions that we're using in CMX. And then I can generally see trends in usage. So I just updated the screenshot before the talk, so you can see we're preparing a new release, and so we just released some release candidates in the beta channel, and you can see our CMX usage is ramping way up. 16 clusters in a day or so yesterday. One thing I'd love to add to this, and I think Replicator already supports it, is tags for the CMX clusters. So it'd be great if we could tag our clusters by cost center or by user that provisions the cluster, and that would give us some more insight into department adoption, whether or not QA is increasing or decreasing their usage. It would be really nice to see that, and that's something we'll probably work on this year. I guess it's worth mentioning we were an early adopter, so we got to collaborate on a number of the CMX related features, like the Ingress features are awesome. Our users love that, where you can get a URL for the cluster and just go in your browser and log on. Really excited about getting air gap working for ourselves. And thank you, Replicated, of course. It was an honor to be asked to do a talk like this. And it's great that we've been able to work so closely with Replicated and talk about how we're using these features and get quite a lot of new features for our testing. So that's kind of like a general sales pitch of what we're getting out of it. I wanted to get into the specifics of how we're using this in Jenkins and Bitbucket. So we're talking about CI/CD pipeline integration. So for KNIME, we use both Jenkins and Bitbucket pipelines. It's really because we started with Bitbucket pipelines and are slowly migrating to Jenkins. But as it stands today, we use Jenkins for like an ad hoc cluster if you just need one at any point, and we use it for a lot of upgrade and release testing. And Bitbucket pipelines, what we're using that for is the pull request validation. So if we're adding new features to our application, it'll run Bitbucket pipelines, and I have some screenshots to show what that looks like. So this is a screenshot of what it looks like in Jenkins. I had to take two screenshots to fit it all on one screen, but essentially in Jenkins, the way we have it set up, the user fills out a pretty big form of what they want. And I did want to spend a couple minutes talking about the different things that we added here in case it sparks some ideas for other Replicated customers. So when we do the pipeline, we can pick the app. Right now, this is the app slug, I think is what it's called in replicate terminology. Right now, we just have KNIME Hub really that we use, but we could install others. You can specify the version that you want to install, obviously. So, 1.14 release candidate 5 or whatever in here. We have a dropdown for which release channel you want to use. And I'll move on from that, but there's a little detail about that. Um, you can pick the Kubernetes distribution. This is obvious stuff. So one thing that we do that's kind of cool in Jenkins is for each Kubernetes distribution, we have defaults predefined for like for EKS, it'll say default to Kubernetes 1.31 and it'll default to a certain instance size so that our users don't have to know the proper available instance sizes for every distribution because it does change. Like OpenShift, they're named completely differently. So basically, when they pick distribution, they're getting some defaults, and then they can override, say, the Kubernetes version. If they want to try out 1.32 or something early, they can do that. We let them pick how long the cluster stays alive, how many nodes get attached. This is not relevant really for this presentation. And then a couple other things. So this terminate early is pretty cool. I talk about it in a couple places in this deck, but what we do is a user can optionally say that if you provision the cluster and it generates a support bundle and there's no issues, that it just terminates the cluster early. And the reason we do that is because for a lot of our testing, we just want to know, it's like a smoke test. Like, did the installation just, proceed, the application, all the pods are there, et cetera. We're good. We can terminate early. And that does save us a little bit on cost, obviously, because we're not keeping it online for maybe more than 15, 30 minutes. But sometimes, and you'll see we have it defaulted to off. Most of the time our users do want to have the cluster alive for longer, but this is really useful for like the automated testing scenarios where you want to optimize on cost. And then, yeah, we let users upload like custom COTS admin configuration. So if they want to have predefined files for enabling and disabling certain features and that kind of thing, you can just upload that file directly in Jenkins. And then we have the replicated license, and we have 2 licenses for our product, so you can upload both. And once you do that, this general process kicks off. So that was the form, the user fills in the form. And at that point, Jenkins would provision the cluster, install the application, and it'll wait. Right now, it's just a very simple sleep for, a certain number of seconds, but it'll wait a good amount of time. And at the end of that wait period, it will look to see if the support bundle showed any errors. Based on that, it may terminate the cluster early. But regardless, it will always upload the support bundle back to Jenkins as an artifact. And we also give the user the kube config and a couple other things. And I think I have a screenshot of that. But that's what the general process looks like. And here's just a screenshot of what it looks like in Blue Ocean. So you can see, like, to the user, they just see, oh, the cluster was provisioned, and the support bundle ran, and then this is showing the terminate step was skipped in this case. And I'll say I'm talking about Jenkins a good bit, but I really Jenkins has not always been my favorite solution because it's just kind of an older CI/CD solution, and there's a lot of new ones that have come out with competitive features. But I'll say Jenkins has actually been fantastic for us. We made a reusable library of functions. So like for us to provision a cluster, we just make a very simple call and fill in a couple parameters. So the library is reusable. And then we have essentially everything's based on a single pipeline just for creating a cluster. And that base pipeline has been extended already by a number of other pipelines that are doing more complex tasks. Like for load testing, you might spin up multiple clusters at once or do something more complex. But this like original simple pipeline that we made is the foundation of how it gets used across departments at KNIME. I did just want to show what it looks like when it runs successfully. Because you can see a couple things. Unfortunately, this particular cluster, we didn't give a URL to the user, but essentially they would see the screen where it's done. They would get a URL to like log into the cluster. This particular link is to terminate the cluster early via a separate job, which is a separate issue. But you'll see the user will also see like they get all the build artifacts. So, they'll always be able to get the bundle no matter if the pipeline ran a week ago or whatever, and they'll always get the kube config to connect to the cluster. I'll skip over that one. And then, yeah, this was just in case I forgot to mention it. We also record a little bit of metadata about the cluster, and that's helpful in downstream Jenkins pipelines for being able to tell what kind of cluster we provisioned and do some automated tasks. But this is generally what we're saving here, as well as, I guess, the logs. Here's like an example of using that pipeline a number of times with a downstream pipeline, just to kind of reinforce that idea that in this case, we have two pipelines, one for creating the test cluster and one for deleting the test cluster. And so I honestly don't even know who spun this up. Some other team spun up 4 of our test clusters for some reason. And then as part of their pipeline, they kick off that delete cluster pipeline at the end to remove them. And so that's really like how we use it for Jenkins. And then in Bitbucket pipelines, it's a little different. So for Bitbucket pipelines, we have our Bitbucket repository, which is our integration with Replicated that has all the Helm chart manifests and COTS admin config options and pre-flights and support bundle, right? So that's our main integration repository. And then when a user creates a pull request to say add a new Helm chart to the application or change some setting, etc., it will trigger Bitbucket, which does a very similar thing. It'll provision a test cluster, it'll wait, generate a support bundle. In this older integration, instead of uploading the support bundle Jenkins, it uploads it to S3 and gives you a link, but it will update the build status in Bitbucket. And here's like a practical example of Bitbucket catching a bug. So this is a pipeline that ran a few days ago, and somebody was working on a secret store feature, it looks like. And we, as you can see from these high-level steps here, I know there's a lot of text on the screen, sorry, but if you look at these steps, you'll see we took their code, we made a release and replicated, spun up an EKS test cluster, installed, uploaded the support bundle, and then analyzed the support bundle and realized there are some errors, and then you can see them here. So you can see like a couple pods are in some, config error status, and the user could click on the link to the support bundle, download that, and take a look at what happened. And in this case, because the support bundle showed an issue, we would have kept that support bundle, or we would have kept the cluster online for 2 hours after this happened, after the issue was identified, so that the user could go back, log back into the cluster if they're still online and check out what happened. So I mentioned it a few times. Again, to some people, it might be obvious, but I think it's a really cool solution, and we rely really heavily on this. We use the support bundle to tell whether or not the installation worked. And so, because we do that, I think it's really important to focus on making the support bundle as good as possible and as complete as possible, because that helps with internal automated testing, and it also helps with customers when they're generating the support bundle. The fact that it's in the same format and that we have all the same analyzers and collectors and so on, it really helps. And so what we do is we check for every single deployment in the cluster. We check every the status of everything there to make sure that not only are there no errors in the cluster, which is the kind of the default thing that the support bundle looks for, but that there aren't any missing pods or deployments from the cluster where a Helm chart failed to render or get installed entirely for some reason. It's just completely missing. The support bundle won't identify that by default, so we explicitly check for that. And then lastly here, I just want to show, this is like straight out of Jenkins. We cat the analysis.json file. We use YQ to parse the file as, I guess we parse it as YAML. I'd have to think about that. But we delete a few things that we don't need out of the analysis file, and then we just query for any severity equals error issues. And this very simple logic has worked for the 2,500 test clusters. So feel free to copy it. And I don't know how I've done for time, but we're at the kind of closing thoughts of how we're using it and so on. So some things, I think I mentioned a couple, but some things that we really want to do in the near future is tag our CMX clusters. So that's something that works today that we're just not using. And I think that would let us, map cost to particular teams and also track adoption and success of the overall, solution. One thing I'd like to do is, if you think about the graphs that I showed of our internal analytics, I would love to have whether or not the cluster is successfully installed as just a metric that we capture in our database with like the cluster ID as the unique key, so that we could visualize, is the stability of general CMX testing getting better or worse, which might indicate some issues with our CMX testing pipelines, or might indicate, the general stability of our application. There's a new feature coming out, network policies, which is helping with air gap, and you can set up network policies for other types of network restricted environments. Really excited to get that working in our own environment. And I added this item here. So I mentioned earlier on that you could upload custom COTS admin config to our Jenkins pipeline. So, if you want to pre-configure the application. Right now, it requires users to upload like files manually, but it would be great to have like the concept of testing profiles. And I'm kind of mentioning this because it would be great to have a lot of the things I've shown just baked into CMX in general. But if it were, essentially what we want to be able to do, and I think this goes along with the theme that Chuck was talking about having the application as an appliance, is we just want to be able to provision a test cluster, install our application with a certain configuration so that we can do the test. And right now, the installation of the application piece is what we're orchestrating ourselves in Jenkins. And lastly, I would say our pre-release testing pipeline, it's good. You can see the uptick in CMX clusters before a release, but I don't think we have achieved yet the original vision of Compatibility Matrix, or why it's called Compatibility Matrix, that we don't have like one automated test that tests every supported distribution, every supported version, upgrade testing, like some large test suite that we would run that might cost, $100, $200 worth of CMX credits, but would give us a really complete picture of the overall state of the release. I think that's something that's coming, but we've kind of slowly progressed towards the larger testing. And Amber asked me about this. I guess I would share, I'll say CMX was adopted really quickly in our organization, and just a couple things that I think help make that work. One is for us to get users to use CMX. We started really with the Bitbucket, just the testing the pull requests, and that gained confidence in the team for using CMX in general, and had the fact that it's useful for catching bugs. And then we did the ad hoc pipeline in Jenkins, and then we started doing larger use cases. So I would say, you don't have to necessarily sell the whole organization on this really large comprehensive solution to actually just get value out of provisioning small test clusters. But along those lines, I think replicated compatibility matrix, right? The replicated CLI, I think it's really easy, but it's also not just obvious to all users. So if you want your organization to use this stuff and get value out of that, the automated testing capabilities, in my opinion, documenting and evangelizing the idea is way more important than even building the solution. I think people at KNIME are sick of hearing me say CMX or compatibility matrix, right? I've had to train quite a lot across all departments to get people to use it. I've had to make videos and Confluence documents and READMEs and so on. And I think that's all really important and required, honestly, to get people to adopt something like this, is they just have to feel comfortable knowing that, there's a quick start guide, or that there's a video that they can follow at their own pace. And I think different learners do learn different ways. So I could do a demo in a Zoom call to 50 people And that might work for 5 of them, but maybe for everybody else, they prefer, reading a Confluence document or something. So you try to give materials in multiple formats. Um, and lastly, I would say what helped with this and just adoption in general of new technology and ideas is on each team that I wanted to have use this stuff. I just found like one person who I thought was like the power user, like an early adopter type of personality. And I would ping them and say, hey, you mind trying out this thing we've been testing and see what you think of it? If you have any feedback or doing one-on-one training sessions or in smaller groups. And once I got those people to adopt CMX and start using it for practical use cases, it spread like wildfire across the rest of the teams because, the power users on a team tend to be thought leaders. And so you can, you don't have to mandate that people use this stuff. You can kind of influence them by showing them, I guess is what I'm saying. So finally, I would say a couple best practices, a couple lessons learned. Really pay attention to the support bundle. As I mentioned, that's the better it is, the better everything is in replicated. Promote and document as much as you can if you're making a solution like this so that people really understand step by step how they're supposed to use it, because it's not always obvious how they would get value out of this kind of thing. Yeah, the terminating clusters early, replicated might not be thrilled. I'm talking about this a lot, but terminate clusters early saves a couple bucks. Lessons learned. We love CMX. Like I said, I think 2,500 clusters so far, and maybe like a year or so of using it heavily. I think it's quite a lot of adoption so far, and our internal users are thrilled to have it because a lot of them know what it's like to spin up these clusters manually in EC2 and do every step by hand. It's really nice to just fill in a form, click a button, get a URL, and start testing. Again, Jenkins in particular was a really nice integration. Bitbucket pipelines I thought we would like better, but the forms and stuff in Jenkins and reusable extendable pipelines was a really nice pattern. And I think at least we got a lot of our needs met by submitting a lot of issues, on GitHub, and really, if we needed something, describing it, and Replicated has been a great partner for that. So not that I'm encouraging just submitting a dozen issues today or something with Replicated, but that they have been really receptive to our feedback, and that helped us succeed because some of the things we needed, in particular, like WebSocket protocol support, we needed to be able to test one feature of our application. Replicated got it solved, and now we can test every single feature of our application inside of a CMX cluster. So hopefully I did okay for time. I don't know if there's questions or if we're out of time or.
Yeah, we'll take some questions if anybody has any, but actually that was great. And I'll just comment before anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat or just come on video. But we want you to save money here, right? Like you're like, oh, I don't, like that's great. It's like the goal of Compatibility Matrix is better, faster, cheaper, right? We want this to be the best solution for testing for your, all these different environments. We want it to be super fast, and we want it to be cheaper than what you would do internally. So, our goal, so like kill your clusters as soon as you're done with them, everything else, like that's all great. It's really about value add for us, and that's the goal, right? We know the more that you test your application, the fewer errors your customers are going to have, right? Which makes your team more successful with distributing enterprise software. Also leads to less, support escalations for us. So like this is good for everybody, and that's why we want to see usage of this. To your point, no one spends that much money in a compatibility like matrix right now. It's all like, no one's spending tens of thousands of dollars per month on this. It's like still very, very affordable.
Yeah.
And you can do a ton of testing and load testing, whatever else you want to do. It's great. We love to see it. We think the more you test your application, the more successful you'll be. And then also we love the engagement. Like, that this was a pretty early product. I think we launched it, maybe 18 months ago, and getting feedback from folks like you and some of our other early adopters is super valuable because it allows us to then, continue to iterate in the product. We kind of launched something that's early and easy to access, but we rely on our customers to give us great feedback to engage. And so if somebody has 12 issues they want to open up with Compatibility Matrix, they're welcome to do it today. Like that's like, if you have things that your feedback, concerns, things that aren't working for you, that feedback is super valuable to us. So we will take that all day long.
Yeah, and I will say, so I was just joking about you not being happy about the terminating early, but
Yeah.
I will say it has actually, I didn't focus on that enough. It has been really cost effective. I didn't get an updated like average cost per cluster, but you might think a dollar to $3 or so is a general cluster for a short period, maximum, and how much work is abstracted in both setting up the cluster and for our own team that we don't have to maintain all the infrastructure to provision these test clusters. Really, we're just running some CLI commands in Jenkins. I think it's a great solution for us, and we're going to be using it for a long time. So.
Awesome. Yeah, love to hear that. And hopefully, all the new VM work that we have coming out too will be useful. You'll find all these other pieces that we're doing. That team is definitely actively, building new kind of important features. So